Friends, today we live in an era of change. The most dreaded outcome of change in consumer preferences is the reduced life cycle, or should I say, the redundancy of brands. Let's take an example of a brand like Kodak. Kodak was the fourth most valuable brand in the world. In 2012, shockingly, they filed for bankruptcy. They kept focusing on things like film sensitivity, color spectrum, and so on. But I think what they failed to take into account was that the consumer was graduating to digital, because this gave the consumer the convenience of storing and sharing images. The challenge is due to a lack of consumer connect. And this is very likely to happen when efforts are based on simply observations rather than appropriate and deep consumer insights. And this change can be driven basically on the basis of very good consumer understanding and deep consumer insights.
I so relate with Dove. It is so me. Whoever thought of Dove, I think they understand me better than I understand myself.
Dove created history by using regular women in their campaign. The idea of using normal women was meant to convey the value proposition. Be real, be honest, be truthful, discover the real you.
To reinforce the focus on customer centricity, we have created this program for you, the Mahindra Consumer Insighting Program. Welcome to Module 2 of the e-training module of Mahindra Consumer Insighting Process. Before we begin, let's do a quick recap of Module 1. In Module 1, you were introduced to the concept of consumer insighting, and the discussion included what is a consumer insight, what are consumer insights so important for, what are the key components of a good consumer insight, different types of insights, and lastly, how to use consumer insights in various parts of the business. In Module 2, we are going to study the Mahindra way of insighting. The Mahindra Consumer Insighting Process has 5 steps. Step 1, define the purpose. Step 2, conduct the inciting dialogue. Step 3, extract the insights. Step 4, embed them. And last, step 5, apply the insights. Let us now understand these 5 steps in greater detail. Before we proceed, you are required to print the workbook, which has been provided in a convenient PDF format. Each worksheet of the workbook shall be explained step by step as we progress in this training. Now let us begin with step 1, purpose.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13.
I am sure most of you missed the moonwalking bear in the video. Let's have a look again. Sometimes we can be vulnerable to missing out certain key observations while pursuing the consumer inciting process. So, it is critical that we first define our purpose of inciting, since what we define as the purpose shall decide what we are going to notice. Step 1 of the inciting process is to define the purpose for consumer inciting. So, how do we define the purpose? The first step while defining the purpose is to identify the business goal or the objective. But that alone cannot help us complete our task. It must be duly supported with a systematic approach to accomplish the purpose. There are essentially 3 sub-steps to accomplish the defined purpose. Step 1, what opportunities can propel us to our goals? Step 2, what are the likely barriers in our way to our goals? And step 3, what are the probing areas that will help in getting a better understanding of the opportunities and the barriers that we have already identified. This is a template for defining the purpose for inciting. Now, let us populate this template with the case example of Mahindra KUV 100. While approaching the project for KUV 100, the business intent or goal was to extend the appeal of the Mahindra brand into an entirely new segment, the segment of the entry-level car. Every business intent or goal is influenced by opportunities and by barriers. Based on your past experiences, it is important for you to objectively hypothesize and tabulate the potential opportunities and barriers. Now, how can we identify our opportunities and barriers? Well, the opportunities and barriers are to be identified based on your existing bank of knowledge, analysis, information, and secondary data. Opportunities.
Welcome to step 2 of the Mahindra consumer inciting process. This is the most critical part of the inciting process. It includes 3 steps. The first is setting up the dialogue. The second, capturing the dialogue. Third, conducting the dialogue. In the first step of the process, we are required to set up the dialogue. The first challenge here is to understand what is it that we want to know. Having identified the probe areas in the earlier section, let us begin by creating a list of discussion points for each probe area. For example, you could be probing about their life, the category you plan on working, or maybe simply understanding their behaviors and perceptions about various brands and so on. Now let's take an example of a KUV 100 probe area. What do hatchback buyers aspire for? Does an SUV fit in their aspirations? Here's a list of discussion points as were used for the KUV 100 probe area. About life, changes in life for the better, dreams and aspirations, measures of success, cars or SUVs as symbols of success. About the category, dream car, a dream first car, SUV versus hatch versus sedan associations, purchase decision process, personality of owners, SUV owners versus hatch owners, visualization. If he owned an SUV, then about the brand, top auto or SUV brands, Mahindra associations, perception of users, product discussion. But mind you, instead of directly attacking the respondents with questions, it is always advisable if you introduce the subjects in the mode of a conversation. Now you're requested to fill the displayed worksheet in your MCIP workbook. Make sure you finalize the discussion points for each probe area of your project. Our next target is to identify our respondent base. It is most effective if we can objectively define our target audience base for our inciting exercise. For instance, the first classification of our core TG can always be drawn on the basis of demographic information. We can also resort to psychographic profiles. Let us now use demographic and psychographic profiles to identify KUV 100 consumers. Our primary TG was young, ambitious, first-time job seekers between the age of 25 to 30 years. They were essentially the first-time car buyers. This category of TG was essentially new to Mahindra. The secondary TG was upgraders from hatchbacks in the age of 30 to 35 years. They were SUV aspirers. We can also gain intelligent insights by adding experts to our group of respondents. These experts can be from the category, for instance, auto journalists, bloggers, or even engineers. These experts could be lateral, handle similar consumers, or be in a completely different category. For instance, a lateral expert for an auto category could be, say, someone like an expert from a luxury consumer durables, like premium watches or LED TVs. These can be a potential source for deriving unique and disruptive insights into the category and the product. Now you're requested to fill the displayed worksheet in your MCIP workbook. Make sure you finalize the discussion points for each probe area of your project. Having successfully identified the different target groups for consumer inciting, we must also identify the location for meeting our consumer. As I mentioned earlier, the meeting place can have a profound bearing on the frame of mind of our target groups, and it can have an influence on what they say. For instance, a discussion in a temple may yield very different insights than the same discussion in a bar. Ideally, it is advisable to select an environment that is most naturally suited for the topic of discussion. Like, for example, a coffee shop for youth, homes for housewives, and maybe dealerships to understand the purchase decision making, and so on. Now you're requested to fill the displayed worksheet in your MCIP workbook. Make sure you finalize the discussion points for each probe area of your project. Having set up the dialogue, let us now proceed to the critical phase of capturing the dialogue. While we get ready to conduct the dialogue, we must follow three critical aspects of dialogue capture. Number one, take multiple printouts of the displayed worksheet to cover all probe areas. Point two, you must capture the dialogue in exact consumer verbatim. Please do not employ your own interpretation or opinion. You must write the consumer statements in his exact words. And point number three, ensure that all probe areas and discussion points are covered. Now, let us proceed to understand the process of conducting the dialogue. You are now ready to conduct the dialogue. The main objective behind the process of inciting is to unmask the deeper motivation of our consumers. Avoid following the discussion guide rigidly, even if that means digressing from the prescribed flow of questions. Mind you, depth is far more important than the width of topics. Once we are satisfied with our deeper probing on a question, we can then resume our discussion guide to gain insights on the prescribed list of questions.
So Shri, can you tell me what comes to your mind when I say the word hatch?
Hatch, I mean, The cars, right? Like hatchback cars.
And how would you describe hatchback cars?
I mean, the small cars, right? Like small.
By
Actually,
small you mean cramped?
yeah, something like that.
How would you describe your dream car?
Dream cars are, I mean, it's a Ferrari, obviously. Lamborghini. Go with the Land Cruiser.
Finally, one last question. What type of car will you be buying next?
I can't afford these cars. I mean, the cars I mentioned are expensive. I mean, it'll be my first car if I buy a car now. So, I think it'll be a Hyundai i10 or a Maruti.
The correct methodology of conducting a dialogue can be effectively constructed through the principles of insight dialogue. Avoid one's own personal opinions.
And how would you describe hatchback cars?
I mean, the small cars, right? Like small.
By
Actually,
small you mean cramped?
yeah, something like that.
Use exploratory questions, not direct ones.
So what do you look for in a car?
Remember, probing is the key to unmasking deeper insights.
And how would you describe hatchback cars? By
Actually-
small you mean cramped? How would you describe your dream car? So finally, last question. What type of car will you be buying next?
Avoid showing intent to close the interview until you are satisfied with your probing and have succeeded in drawing the insights.
So finally, last question. What type of car will you be buying next?
Before starting the dialogue, put the respondent at ease. Avoid being anxious. Unless you're at ease, you will never be able to build the bridges with your respondent. It is advisable if you spend a few minutes building a rapport with him. You can do this by inquiring about who he is, what he does, his likes and dislikes, and so on. You can build a connect by relating to any of these questions or sharing an experience or an example of someone you know.
Oh, hi, I'm Abhishek.
Hello. Hey, I'm Shrey.
Nice to meet you. Please have a seat. So, can I get you something, tea or coffee?
Sure, I don't mind a coffee.
Just give me a second. Can you send in 2 coffees, please? Thank you. So, Shrey, tell me, what do you do for a living?
See, I'm a data analyst. And I'm currently working with Accenture.
Okay, superb. So, Shrey, tell me more about yourself, your job.
See, I love my job, to be honest. It lets me travel, which is one. And I love traveling.
That's really, really wonderful. I'm sure you're gonna love this session.
Obvious questions with conclusive answers don't really help in gaining insights. They're only good for gaining quantitative data. You must refrain from attaching words that are likely to influence the respondent's opinion. The art of inciting demands probing. You must probe to get to the deeper meanings of your respondent's words. While conducting a dialogue, you need to focus on the deeper dialogues.
So, you mentioned hatchback cars, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about it?
Basically, hatchbacks are smaller cars. In my language, it's like a good compromise of everything.
Good compromise of everything. So, can you elaborate on that?
It's more affordable. It also have a decent mileage and good power. So all in all, good value for money.
Okay. So, Shrey, if you were to buy a car, okay, what is it that you would look for in a car?
Well, looks are very important for me. No, it is very important. And you know what? I think the car should complement my personality.
Okay. So you just mentioned looks.
Yeah.
Like, can you just elaborate on that?
Like, it should be youth. It should be youth, it should be smart, peppy, and I want that aggression in the car.
So Shrey, tell me, what else do you look for in a car?
I mean, I want a package. I don't just want a car. I want the car to be powerful. I want it to be compact. I also want the car to be accustomed to Indian roads, which is very important. We know the potholes and the speed breakers that are there. And good turning radius, if that can be there, I'll be very happy because the traffic is really bad. I think that's also, okay, see, I'm tall. So I need like good spacious car. I want like good luggage space and like space that gives me my zone.
Trust the person to contribute if you create the right space.
So tell me, which is your dream car?
You said dream car.
Yeah.
Ferrari,
Ferrari,
Lamborghini,
Lamborghini.
and Land Cruiser.
Okay. Shrey, the cars you mentioned like Ferrari, Lamborghini and Land Cruiser, aren't they two different types of cars?
Yeah, they are. I mean, to be honest, I have only seen Ferraris and Lamborghinis in the movies. But if I can choose one, I would go for a Land Cruiser.
Okay.
If I get a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, I might as well get a towing van with them as well, because I think the Indian potholes are massive. I won't really work in here.
Delve into the why, the history, the details, as opposed to just the first answer and its facts. Focus on difficult to admit emotions underneath one's rationalizations.
Tell me, what kind of car would you like to buy?
Okay. I think I will go with an SUV. But the thing with SUVs is that SUVs are slightly on the expensive side. And I haven't bought a car yet. Like, I don't have a car and I want to buy one. And if I get a car, I'll be the first one in my group to have a car. So even if I end up getting a hatchback, I'll be good. So I hope there are companies that are making good, affordable, amazing hatchbacks as well, which, you know, can be this.
Use all your senses. Respondents tell a lot beyond just their words. Seek to understand what posture, tone, facial expressions are revealing beyond the words.
Hatchback can be a good practical choice. I admit hatchback may not be my dream car, but it's a good practical choice and I like it.
So do you like to travel out of the city for weekends?
Oh, we love it. Traveling is our favorite thing. Our group's like a travel group. हमारे ग्रुप में किसी ने गाड़ी ली ना, सब ट्रैवल ही करने हैं फिर बस. और every weekend is going to be outside the city. Like, it should be youth. It should be youth, it should be smart, peppy, and I want that aggression in the car. When you talk about performance, it's a different deal altogether, because I think the car should be ready for the Indian roads. That is one. Second, I mean, you do know there's a lot of traffic on the streets, so I want my car to have a good turning radius. I want it to have good power. I mean, power really helps. And I think I'll be happy if it has a very good pickup as well. I mean, it should be fun to ride, you see. So the car should have a lot of space for people and the luggage. So we can go on a lot of weekend trips.
Now, let's move to step 3, the extraction of insights. Pulling out an insight from the interviews is usually a group exercise. The team that conducted the interviews usually gets together and puts together all the quotes from consumers and classifies them into groups, which then lead to insights. This extraction of insights is done in a 4-step process. Step number 1. Each team member of the Insight Mining group tells their consumer story. They share their experience with their respondents, and while doing so, they are required to use the respondents' words to the maximum extent possible. During this consumer story session, you are required to share the following information about your respondent. Number 1, what did you observe when you walked into the respondent's home? Number 2, what are some of the interesting anecdotes from your conversation? And number 3, what new things did you learn from your conversation with the respondent? And number 4, what do you think may be the deeper reasons for the respondent's behavior? Number 5, what did you intuitively feel about the respondent's behavior? Looking at number 6, did you spot any anomalous behavior? And then, what were the feelings, belief systems that were driving the respondent's behavior? Number 8, what are your conclusions about the respondent? While the storytelling is going on, the rest of the team members are required to note down the consumer verbatims on post-its and place them on a board. If you're doing the extraction process by yourself, simply refer to your notes and transfer each consumer statement on a separate post-it by yourself. Here are 2 examples of capturing verbatims. The essential points to remember while capturing a verbatim are: 1, there should only be 1 verbatim per post-it. Number 2, it should be written clearly. Number 3, the respondent's name, age and description must be written on every single post-it. Step number 2. After finishing the process of capturing the verbatims on post-its, the post-its are then grouped into clusters based on the probe areas defined in the intent. This is done to discover the hidden patterns in the user's lives. These clusters are created intuitively based on observations that seem related in meaning. Clusters are then discussed within the group and reclassified. Some ideas and observations may be combined and some new clusters may emerge. These final clusters form the basis for arriving at insight areas.